Thanks for tuning in at Brackeys.
Hello everyone and welcome to this third video on creating a tower defense game in Unity. So today we are going to be creating a wave spawner that will of course spawn in waves of enemies. So that's going to be a lot of fun. We are going to be creating a very bare bones version of a wave spawner because we're only going to have one type of enemy that we will spawn in groups. And we are only going to have one spawn point. So it's very simple actually. If you want something more configurable that has all of these stuff, like you can have different levels with different enemies and different spawn points, well then you should check out my two-part series on the channel on creating a wave spawner. It's kind of a standalone mini-series and it has all the functionality that you're going to need basically. But we are probably going to modify this anyways to do more stuff later. So without further ado, I will just show you here before we get started that the project is now in GitHub. So if you go to the link in the description, you can go and download the entire project with everything that I've made, and you can just open it up in Unity, or you can grab scripts from it or whatever you want. So if you have a trouble with something or just want to mess around with my project, you can go here, hit clone or download, and download a zip file, or you can of course use GitHub to clone it as we go along. And if you want an older version, then you can go to commits here and you can select whatever version you want. And you can see right now there's only video 2. There's of course going to be video 3, 4, and 5 and so on. But video 1 is not actually here. I'm sorry, but I forgot to do it with the first video. So everything starts at video number 2. Sorry, won't happen again. Good. So without further ado, let's open up Unity and get started with the video. So let's right click and hit create empty, and let's rename this to game master. And this object right here is going to have different scripts that manages the game. We could also call it game manager or just manager or scripts or whatever. I'm going to call it game master, and let's make a new script on this called wave spawner, and then we can have just a series of scripts here. So let's double click on that to open it up in Visual Studio. And the basics of a wave spawner is in fact, well, pretty basics. We are just going to use the instantiate command pretty excessively and then make sure to time it in some way. So what we're going to do is we're going to delete these two methods to begin with, and then let's make a public, and we're going to make this a transform, and this is going to be the prefab of the enemy that we want to spawn. So this is just going to be our enemy prefab, and this is what we could later turn into some kind of level that will rise in difficulty or some different enemies that we can choose from. But for now, let's just choose this one single enemy that we've made. And then we want, of course, some public float, which is going to be the time between waves, or the countdown timer, or whatever you want to call this. And this is going to be just for testing purposes. I'm going to set this to 5, but in reality you probably want it to be longer. Then what we want to do is we want to go into the update method, and we want to have some kind of way of managing time. And what I thought we would do is create a private variable here, a private float that we call the countdown. And we might want some kind of way of getting this number or using this number to display it on the screen. But for now, it will just be behind the scenes, and we might change this in this video, in fact, if we are fast. And this is going to start off at whatever you want the time, however long you want it to take before it spawns the first wave. So that might not be 5, or that might exactly be 5. So I'm going to set this to 2 so that it takes 2 seconds until it spawns the first wave. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the update method here, and I'm going to say that if countdown is less than or equal to 0. So if our timer has reached the 0 mark, well then we want to start spawning some enemies. So we are going to make a method down here that is going to say spawn wave. And that's going to be responsible for spawning an entire group of enemies, right? So right now we can just use a debug.logs statement here that says a wave incoming, something like that. And then we can close that off. And then here we want, of course, to call the spawn wave method that we just created. So that will jump down here and execute this code. And then we want to set the countdown timer again, because we don't want it to stay at 0 and then just keep counting down to -1, -2. No, we want this to be set then to the time between waves. So, and then we need some kind of way of decreasing this countdown timer. We want it to go down by 1 every second, and we want to do this every frame. So we can say that countdown minus equals time.delta time. And again, time.delta time is the time amount of time passed since the last time we drew a frame. So if we just do this, it's going to mean that it will reduce countdown by 1 every second. And we'll do so fluently. So what we are doing here is we are creating a countdown float that is going to decrease with time. And when it reaches 0, we spawn a wave and we reset it to 5 seconds. Okay, so that's all we're doing, and let's try and save this and see if it actually works. So our wave spawner is here. Let's make sure to find our enemy prefab and drag it in here. Let's make sure to delete these enemies and now hit play, and we should see that after 2 seconds we get a wave incoming, and then after a following 5 seconds we should get another wave incoming, and there it was. So that's perfect. So whenever we spawn a wave, we basically want to spawn a group of enemies. And to determine how many enemies that's going to be, there's lots of different stuff that we could do. We could either make an array of waves with an enemy type and the number of enemies we want to spawn and the delay between them and all that. And that's what we do in the Wave Spawner short series. So you can check that out if that's what you want. Or if we are lazy, we could use the wave number, the number of waves that we've been through, that we've encountered, to tell how many enemies we want to spawn, so that the difficulty will increase as we go through another wave. And you can do this using some kind of function. You could use some kind of polynomial, that's like we will take the wave number and we will square it, and that will be how many enemies we will face. But we could also just use, well, the wave number to determine how many enemies it's going to be. So the first wave will be 1 enemy and the second 2, and so on. So that's what we're going to do for now. And then we can come in and change it later, which we will probably do. So the spawn wave here is now just going to spawn some kind of wave number, and we will loop through this using a for statement, but first we need to create this wave number, and that's going to be a private integer, and we are going to call this the either wave number or wave index. I think we will start this at 1, and therefore I'm going to call this the actual wave number, and that's going to be 1. There we go. And then every time we spawn a wave, we can take our wave number and increase it when we are done spawning. And yeah, that all makes sense. But this is actually, yeah, that's the current wave number. Everything is good. Good. So what we can do here now is that we can loop through this wave number. So we can use a for statement, and if you have hit tab here twice, it's going to autofill this, auto-complete it. And for I is less than, and then we use wave number. That's going to be the amount of enemies. And then for each of these, we can spawn an enemy. And that's another method that we are going to be creating. So let's do a void spawn enemy. And this is going to be a very short method, but it's good to split it up into different methods and then add stuff to those methods as we go. And we are going to instantiate. What are we going to instantiate? Well, we are going to instantiate our enemy prefab. And now we need to determine where to instantiate this. And therefore, I want to go up here and I want to create a reference to some kind of spawn location. Public transform. And we are going to call this spawn point. And that's again something we'll reference in the inspector. And then we can scroll down here again on this spawn enemy. So we'll spawn the enemy prefab at spawn point.position at spawn point.rotation. There we go. And now we've spawned this enemy, and we don't need to worry about despawning it or anything. That will be handled by our pathfinding system, so that's fine. We are actually done. Whoops, we are actually done with this script for now. So if we go back into Unity now and find our game master, we should have another empty slot, and that's going to be for the spawn point. So we can go ahead and create some kind of empty object, or we could just use our start node. So if we go on the Game Master, find our start node and drag that in there, that should actually do it. So when we hit play, we are still not going to have any visual representation of what's going on, but we can see that we just spawned an enemy, and after 5 seconds it should hopefully spawn 2 enemies, which it did. However, each of these enemies, you can see here that it's spawning lots of enemies, but there are multiple enemies on top of each other. And that's a problem. So how do we space these out? Well, we could do the same, have some kind of float variable up here that we reset, some kind of countdown separate from the other countdown, or we could use what is called a coroutine. And this is a super handy, super awesome way of kind of creating these subroutines, these ways of executing code separate from our main piece of code. So we have this main countdown that spawns waves, and then we have this separate wave spawner that has its own timing and runs in its own separate way. And the way to do this is we simply turn this method here, the spawn wave, into a coroutine. How do we do this? Well, in a very confusing way. So if we go up here, we type in using system.collections. The namespace I removed earlier, but I wanted to show you that that's why it's there. That's primarily what you use it for in Unity most of the time. So using system.collections, and that allows us to write this weird I enumerator here. And the I enumerator, instead of void, allows us now to pause this piece of code. So we can actually wait X amount of seconds before continuing. So what we can do here is we can spawn an enemy, and then after we've spawned an enemy, we can say yield return new, wait 4 seconds, and this is a lot of weird syntax, and I'm not going to explain it in detail. And then we could maybe wait 0.2 seconds, or we could maybe wait like half a second, or you could turn this up, this here into some kind of variable that we can adjust. But for now, I think I'll just hard code it in here. So that will indeed start our spawn wave, loop through it, spawn an enemy, wait 0.5 seconds, spawn another enemy, wait 0.5 seconds, and so on, and then it will increase the wave number. And I just realized that since we are waiting within this spawn wave, it might be a good idea to increase the wave number up here and then have it start at 0 instead. And actually, I'm going to rename this to wave index. It's just cleaner. It just feels more nice. Okay, so the only thing that we need to realize here is whenever we create an enumerator, we can't just call the method like this. This is not the way that you start a coroutine. Instead, we simply write start coroutine, and then we input the spawn wave in here, and remember to open and close the parentheses to indicate that we are talking about a function. So that was all we needed to do, and now when we go back here, we should hopefully see this piece of code working. So when we hit play now, we should see after 2 seconds it spawns 1 enemy. Then we wait another 5 seconds and it should spawn 2 with an interval of 0.5 seconds. And that's it's just going to keep doing this as the difficulty increases. And you can see we actually already have a pretty nice scaling system for making more and more difficult enemies. You will also realize that at some point we are going to start spawning enemies on top of each other, because it's going to take so long to spawn a wave that there's not going to be enough time to finish spawning it before another wave starts. And that's of course a problem with our system, but that's not something we'll worry about yet. I think we have more important stuff to implement, and then later we can look at that kind of stuff. So now when we save this, we have that done, and let me just check the time here. Yeah, so I think we just have time to maybe display this countdown on a timer on the UI. So let's just do that really quickly, because it makes this system feel a lot nicer. So let's right click over here and create our first UI element. So let's go into UI, and this is going to be a simple text object. Let's go to the canvas now, hit F to focus on that, and that's giant, but that it should be huge. And then let's switch to 2D mode and switch our controls here over to the 2D controls. Let's find our text object and let's center this on the top. So if you hold down Alt and click here, it's going to snap it, anchor it to the top, and move it to the top. And now we can hit F to focus in on this once more. We can then move it down by holding Shift to snap it to this axis right here. And then we can maybe scale this up to make some more room. And I'm using Alt here to scale in all axes, and we can move it down some more. Then we can center it on the X and center it on the Y. And then we can maybe just input some kind of number here. So I'm just going to input 20. I'm going to scale this up quite a bit, something like, I don't know, maybe 80. That's very large. Let's try 70. And then we can also change the color of this. To probably a white is what I'm going to want here. But we should really mess around with this some more in the future. I know this looks kind of weird, but we're going to be moving around the camera anyway, so it's going to be looking a little weird. But what we can do is maybe add some kind of shadow just to make it stand out from the white on our level. So let's just write in shadow here, and that just helps it pop just a bit. And we can maybe increase the shadow here a tiny bit, something like that. And I'm also going to make this a bold number to make it stand out even more. So now we actually have this number that looks fairly decent. And yeah, and we can of course edit that. And again, I insist that you spend more time on the UI than I do. We'll probably also find some kind of cool font. I don't like the Arial default font, but for now this is going to work just fine. And this is going to be renamed to the wave countdown timer. And what we can then do is we can jump back into Visual Studio here. And we can add a reference to this and change it in the update method. So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to go in here and add a reference. And let's actually add that right by the time between waves. So this is going to be a public, and then we want a reference to a text object. So we are going to be using unityengine.ui that will allow us to reference a text. And we're going to call this the wave countdown text. Like that. And then in the update method, as we go through here, and we're going to do this after we change the countdown, I believe. Is it really important? I don't know. Sure, let's do that. And then let's set our wave countdown text dot text to be equal to countdown. And we want this to be toString to convert it to a string. And to avoid that this has all kinds of float numbers, all kinds of decimal places is what it's called. We are going to actually do something kind of cool here. So we're going to say math.floor, and that's going to simply cut off all of the decimal places and only leave the first one. And then that is what we want to turn into a string. So we're going to math.floor it and then do a toString right after that. Something like that. So floor will simply cut off all of the decimal places. It's not going to round or anything. It's simply going to, well, always round down then to an integer value. And it's still in a float data type, but it is a whole number. So that's what that's going to do. And then we probably want to, since we are flooring it, we probably want to add one. So if we just add one here, I think that's actually, let's try this out. So let's hit play here and see what happens to this number. Oh, of course we need a reference. So in our game master, we should drag in the wave countdown text. There we go. And now we should see, it says 10, and you can see it skips the 5 there. And that's kind of what I wanted to avoid. But then again, it kind of jumps quickly. That's annoying. So what we can do instead is we could try and round this. So if we round this number off, we can see now it says 210 and then 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and that's fine. So you can see it jumps a bit there, but that's okay. I think we'll live with that. If we want to change that, what we can do is make the time between waves something like 5.5, and now that should actually be fixed here. So there we go. So now it won't jump in time. So that's perfect. And yeah, that's a working countdown timer. So that's great. That's basically all I wanted to show you for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I can't wait for the next one. I think this series is really fun to work on. So without further ado, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next video. So I'm gonna start mentioning Patreon supporters the following month after they donate, so that there won't be any difference from donating at the beginning of the month to the end of the month. This way everyone will get a full month of mentions, and yeah, everyone will be happy. So just wait for the next month and you will see your name here. So thanks for watching and I'll see you soon.